Tonight, we have volume 13 of Scary Stories to Relax to. Even though the word relax is in the title, these stories are anything but. From stories of white noise, monsters, a strange lady who visits a store a little too often, and even a story from the perspective of a sleep paralysis demon. We have quite the lineup tonight. Also, I wanted your opinion on how to proceed with this series. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like the future volumes to have rain only, or rain and music together. Your input will shape how this series is done in the future. Of course, I'll still have regular uploads going up in between, as we always have. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Every time you are surrounded by nothing more than silence, there seems to be the static white noise that gets louder the longer you hear an absence of sound. Referred to sometimes as the deafening silence, this phenomena has caused numerous discussions all centered around one question: what causes it? Some state that white noise is a sort of sound filler that the brain itself creates to protect from complete silence. I'm here to tell you that this is a hoax. The white noise is the call of something sinister, a forbidden language older than time itself. It is of utmost importance that you immediately jam something in your ear when you hear even a semblance of this noise. It all started on one Sunday dawn. The dark sky had just shown the first rays of a rising sun, painting a blue portrait with a touch of gold. A beautiful start to another day. I was drinking my morning coffee when my ears caught a faint, high-pitched noise, sort of like a screeching teapot, but more disoriented. I tried to ignore it, but after a few minutes I lost my patience. "Do you hear that?" I half whispered to my wife, whom was clicking away at her cell phone. The question didn't seem to register with her. I forgot that she had just recovered from an ear infection, resulting to her hearing being impaired. I took a deep breath, spoke up. "Hey, do you hear that?" "Hear what?" answered my wife, half-wittingly. I looked at her, and somehow got lost in how the sun's yolky rays caressed her face ever so softly. It's nothing." I smiled as I took a sip at my mug, appreciating the masterpiece in front of me, and seemingly forgetting about the white noise, which had apparently dissipated. This continued on for a couple weeks. Same old scenario, and I rise up to a brand new day, get a cup of coffee, and then hear this enigmatic noise. The noise dispersed each time I pointed it out to my wife, whose hearing had unfortunately just gotten worse. This repeated for a couple more weeks until one day, where the noise just didn't stop. "Don't you hear? Don't you hear?" We stared at and waited for the other to continue each one's sentence. "What's that noise? It's so beautiful." We both said simultaneously as we looked around for its source. Nothing but the soft hum of the air conditioning unit, and the high-pitched noise filled the air. I looked at her perplexed face and reasoned out. Maybe it's some sort of electric feedback coming from a machine somewhere. It'll pass soon enough. To which she just shrugged it out, continued tapping on her phone, and said, "I kinda like it." This warranted my surprise, but I didn't bother talking about it anymore as I still had work to do. Gradually, the noise became louder and louder, to the point that I couldn't ignore it anymore. Where the heck is that noise coming from? It hasn't stopped for weeks. I looked at her and saw that her annoyance was evident in the waves of her forehead, as she grit her teeth and said, "Will you stop it? It's not funny anymore." "Stop what?" "Whatever you're doing. You keep doing it as if it isn't obvious enough." She was fiercely stomping her feet away from me when, after a few seconds, she picked up a vase, turned back and threw it at where my head was just a few seconds ago. Had I ducked a second later, it would have hit me. "I'm not overreacting. Shut up." The abrupt outburst was met with my surprised silence, as I never said she overreacted. I watched her walk out of the room, feeling too scared to do or say anything else. The rest of the morning passed with us avoiding each other, me not wanting to argue anymore, and her probably not wanting to see or hear me. The only thing that didn't leave me was this noise. I was pacing around the living room back and forth, losing my mind to that godforsaken noise, when I heard something heavy fall from the upstairs bedroom. I stopped in my tracks and tried to drown out the noise, while looking for any clue about what was happening. Loud thuds erupted from the bedroom, which was accompanied by a horrifying scream, making me start to panic. I went up the stairs, pacing up 2 steps at a time. I finally reached the door and was about to grab the knob when a hair-raising voice growled from the other side. "Stop, stop, stop." My whole body became petrified, and I didn't know what to do, but I knew something was wrong, so I reached for the knob. "Please tell me what's wrong. Why are you acting like this?" All of a sudden, the doorknob was twisting clockwise and counterclockwise repeatedly, while being accompanied by loud bangs on the door. At this point, I stepped away from the door. The white noise yet again rose in intensity, and I was forced on the ground while covering my ears with all of my strength. Then, everything was silenced, including the noise, and a warm feeling embraced my body. A voice which was not my wife softly spoke out. "Submit yours." "Shut up, shut up." My wife's voice interrupted, and I dashed downstairs while hearing her, or whatever is in there, shout "shut up" repeatedly. I jumped the last 6 steps, and frantically looked around, thinking of what to do next. I made a dash for the kitchen to see if I could use anything in my defense, if ever things go messy. I opened the knife set, and to my horror, found out that one was missing. Screams yet again erupted from upstairs, and I heard my wife pounding on the floor again and again. I stood in a corner, unsure of what to do. Then, the white noise was screeching again, and this time it was more prominent than ever. It reached a point where it was like a static TV was right next to my ears. I kneeled down and covered my ears. My ears were almost squeezed flat from all the force I had put on them to stop the noise. Nothing happened. It just continued to get louder and louder, and I just continued to push against my ears, harder and harder, until it hurt so much I couldn't push any further. Somehow, the noise began to become soothing, like the soft hums of a mother lullabying a child. It became so that I actually liked hearing the noise, and then I began to hear a voice speak. Break all of... Honey, are you there? Come upstairs, let's talk." My wife's voice cut off the mysterious sound, and I stood up and removed my hands from my ears. The white noise impaired my hearing, but I remained steadfast. "Are you okay? Are you hurt? Wait for me, I'm coming." No answer. I dashed for the stairs, taking several paces each at a time. When I was just a few steps from the door, I noticed the door was slightly open, showing a small part of the room. While reaching for the door and pushing it ever so slightly, my eyes scanned the room for any sign of my wife. The whole room was a mess. Cabinets were fractured and smashed. Clothing littered the ground, and shards from broken glassware and lights were scattered all over. Somewhere around the room, I saw a pool of blood trailing from the bed to the corner of the room, which grew wider and wider. This is where I saw the silhouette of my wife kneeling against the wall. Slowly and steadily, I took a few steps towards her. Each step I took was fueled with both fear of what could have happened and urgency to try and save her. Dread filled every part of my body as I saw what she did to herself. A knife was stuck inside her left ear, and her right ear was riddled with bloody holes. "What have you done?" I stared at her, waiting for an answer. It didn't have to be verbal. It could be any kind of sign. I just wanted some sort of reaction, but she didn't budge. I hesitantly closed the distance between us. It seemed like we were miles apart. What was a few seconds felt like an eternity to me as I knelt beside her and put my hand on her shoulder. "Are you alright?" Strangely, I saw her smiling. It was the kind of smile a child makes when his or her parents acknowledge him or her. The one that someone makes when embraced by a loved one. A smile of comfort and pure happiness. "Do you hear it?" Her surprisingly soft voice soothed my ears, drowning out the noise for the first time in the day, though it was still evident. "I do." "Do you understand it?" "I don't." She gradually turned her head towards me. Her eyes glistened from the moonlight piercing through the window. Had it not been for the fact that both sides of her head were overflowing with blood and a knife was literally embedded in her left ear, I would have been lost in her beauty. What does it say? A lipless smile formed in her face. Her pupils were dilated, and her smile immediately opened up. Suddenly, the white noise returned, stronger than ever. It was like a flashbang had exploded. My eardrums burned as I writhed in excruciating pain, while I covered my ears to try and block the noise. Her once beautiful face morphed into a demonic one. Blood red filled her eyes, and beating veins became prominent in multiple parts of her face, as her mouth continuously opened wider and wider until it couldn't anymore. Bone cracks filled the air, as her jaw was doing its best to open impossibly wider. At this point, I was pushing against my ears so hard that I lost any sort of feeling in both of them. The noise was snuffed out, and was instead replaced by a warm voice, yet again. Break all the locks preventing you from hearing me. Rip apart your chains with staggering alacrity. My eyes instantly focused to the knife hidden in my belt. An incredibly strong urge to grab it invaded my senses. I removed my hands from my ears and reached for the knife. Free yourself from the limiting binds of your body. Submit yourself to me for all of eternity. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to. It felt good, almost pleasurable to listen to this voice. I pointed the knife directly at my ear and gently pushed. The knife had already gone a few inches inside my ear, feeling intense pleasure with each successive inch when the voice quickly died out and was replaced by the familiar white noise. After regaining my senses, throbbing pain shot through my entire body. I saw what was once my wife now turned into an abomination, still continuously opening its mouth to the point that the skin of its cheeks were being ripped apart. I pulled out the knife and continuously stabbed it. Stop, stop, stop. I shouted as the stabs were ineffective. It just kept shouting and shouting, its face continuously getting abnormally distorted with each passing second. I started stabbing its face with all of my might, my body no longer exhibiting a sliver of love and mercy for this creature that repeatedly tormented me. Eventually, one of the stabs of metal to flesh were being heard in the room, and what was once my soulmate lay dead on the floor. I stopped out of fatigue and weakness from the constant agony the noise was giving me. I couldn't take it anymore. No matter how hard I pushed against my ears, the voice didn't stop, unlike before. I was desperate for all of it to stop. I grabbed the knife and thrusted repeatedly on my right ear until the noise seemed to deteriorate slightly. Shut up, shut up, shut up. I shrieked as I slowly lined the knife up against my left ear and jammed it as hard as I could, at which point the noise completely stopped. I heard nothing. Strangely enough, I felt comforted. All the pain I felt up to this point was insignificant to the pure joy I felt right now. I was drowned in utter euphoria. I've miraculously stopped the bleeding somehow. I'll be alright. I've buried the body, and I'm writing right now to tell you this. Once you hear it, you can't unhear it anymore. The only chance you have of survival is jamming a knife into your ears. Although it sounds painful, the comfort and delight you hear after will make you not regret it. The static white noise you hear in complete silence is not the brain's defense from the call of something sinister. The voice in my head certainly thinks so. My job recently moved to a new building. The first office was in a commercial district. Due to budget cuts and staff reduction, we moved to a cheaper, more rural location. They must have gotten a good deal, as we ended up being the only business in a multi-office building, sent back off the road. Whenever we ordered food, we had to explain the best way to get into our parking lot. The building itself was old and needed work. One of my coworkers compared it to the set of a low-budget horror movie. The only good thing? We were the only occupied office, so there was plenty of parking. Along the far side of the building was a long gravel-lined alley, stretched the length of the building. It was for emergency escape if you couldn't get to the other fire doors. One end was the parking lot, the other end was woods. A second building made up the other side of the alley, but I didn't see any fire doors leading into it. The move was not handled well. The office manager quit suddenly a month before leaving an overworked regional manager to make sure it went smoothly. a task he failed horribly. The results were long days and nights, trying to get this place ready while not disrupting business too much. Corporate, in all its wisdom, had expected us to work at full steam while trying to move an office with minimal outside help. The trouble began soon after the first heavy snowfall. I arrived one morning to find the new office manager very agitated. An animal had passed through the fire alley during the night and gotten into the trash cans we had stored there. The cans were knocked all over the place and somehow damaged the window. My coworker and I selected to clean up the mess. As we put the can back into place, I noticed the animal's tracks in the snow leading away from the cans. I've grown up with dogs, so I was able to recognize them as canine tracks. Although they were rather large prints, larger than a typical stray, my initial thought was a wolf or coyote. Animals like coyotes and wolves rarely attacked humans, but it is still better to be safe than sorry. One way to deter these animals is loud noises. We bought a couple of cheap air horns in case someone worked late and this animal was hanging around. We also moved and secured the cans. Over the next month, we would occasionally see fresh tracks in the snow. The more I looked at them, the more I thought there was something odd about them at the time, but I couldn't place it. I took a picture of the tracks with my phone, planning to do an image search later on. It was the dead of winter when it happened, not long after New Year's. I was the last one in the office. It had been a hectic day. I had lost track of time and it was well after 10 p.m. I had just shut down my computer when I heard it, a low grunting noise, accompanied by a heavy crunching of snow. I froze and cursed myself for not leaving sooner. Still, if this thing was already in the alley, I might be able to slip into my car without being noticed. I turned out the lights, and the crunching sound stopped. I heard a low growl from the alley. Great, I caught its attention. Being careful to stay out of sight of the window, I crept close to the alley door and listened. The growl stopped and was replaced by the sound of the animal sniffing around. I heard a dragging sound as if it were pawing the door trying to open it. Bang. I stumbled backward and fell on my ass. The animal had hit the door. There was another loud bang followed by growling and snarling. I slid back into one of the dark corners of the office and watched the door. There were no lights in the alley, but the moon that night was bright. After the second bang, it was silent, and I was about to move from my hiding spot when I noticed two luminous spots in the window moving left and right. For one absurd moment, I thought they were fireflies. Then it became clear. It was the animal's eyes. It must have been standing on its hind legs, front paws resting on the window ledge. In the bright moonlight, I could see a huge canine head looking back and forth. A deep growl reverberated through the windows. I swear I could just make out large white teeth. When the thing's head turned away from me, I slid further back down into the darkness and tried to make myself as small as possible. It took everything I had to not bolt and run for the front door and my car. I doubt I could make it to my car before this thing caught me. The head vanished from the window, and I hear another loud bang on the door followed by snarling and growling. I tried to even keep my breathing as silent as possible. I don't know if I passed out from fear or my mind just blanked out because the next thing I remember was sitting in the cramped darkness in total silence. I sat there for what seemed like an eternity, listening and watching the window. After not hearing or seeing anything, I bolted from my car. I don't think I've ever driven that fast home. Thank God I didn't get pulled over. And next, I was ripped a new one by the recently hired office manager. I hadn't set the alarm or even locked the door when I ran out the night before. I tried to explain what happened, but he didn't want to hear it. He was pissed I had let something like a stray animal scare me so badly that I forgot to secure the building. In hindsight, I did feel foolish, until my coworker showed me the alley. The heavy metal door was badly dented, with 4 long claw marks in it, those unusual animal tracks all around. I think what saved me, that the door was a heavy metal door that opened outward toward the alley. Had it opened inward, the thing might have had a better chance of breaking in. No one wanted to work late after that, regardless of deadlines or if we were behind. No one wanted to be in the office after dark. After about a month, the office manager had enough. He brought a hunting rifle, very much against company policy, and said he would deal with this problem, and after that, if anyone still refused to work late, then they could find another job. That was a week ago. I got a call from one of the assistant managers. The office would be closed for an unknown amount of time, but I needed to come to the office to give a statement to the police. Later that day, I learned that when the assistant manager had arrived to open the office, he found the fire door open and blood covering the office floor, with bloody drag marks leading down the alley towards the woods. A damaged hunting rifle was found not far from the door. There was no sign of the office manager. I would find out later that someone had reported screaming and a gunshot around 11 p.m. that night. They still haven't found the manager. The police are labeling it as an animal attack and leaving it at that. Word through the office grapevine is the company is trying to get out of the lease and move to a more populated area. The greater terror happened an hour ago. I was at home, watching my neighbor's kid play with their dog. Watching the dog jump through the snow reminded me I still had the picture of the animal's prints on my phone. Maybe I could do a Google search, find out what it was. As I looked at the picture, something clicked in my brain. I looked from the picture to my neighbor's yard and began to tremble so badly I almost dropped the phone. Whatever had been in the alley that night hadn't been walking on 4 feet like a dog. It had been walking on only 2. So, this takes place about a year ago when I was 16, and the friends I was with were 18 and 21. There's an old house near my buddy's house about 3 hours from where I live, that is, out in the middle of the woods, that was supposedly a home of some demonic creature, which may be the thing that has been harassing me now, in present time. But, onwards with the story. I had been invited over to a friend's house on Halloween night since I no longer trick-or-treated. I said sure I'd go, as long as they had some candy and soda to enjoy. My parents let me go. As I grabbed my old phone and my keychain with a small flashlight on it and headed out to their car, they drove me over there, and we had gotten there at about 7 p.m. Eastern, so the sun was down and the moon was high in the sky. It was a waxing crescent that night, so it wasn't lit up like a full moon would do, but they dropped me off, told me they loved me, and I turned and walked to my buddy's front door. I stepped inside and saw him and his older cousin sitting on the couch, just drinking some booze, as their parents in their bedroom probably were sleeping, but I didn't know, nor did I want to know. So I sat down and my buddy's cousin told us about this old tale. His father used to tell him of a haunted cabin, and a devilish being that haunts the cabin. The devilish being was said to be a skinwalker, which is something that any Native American person didn't want to hear. As I am part Native American, I was hesitant to want to stay on the subject. A skinwalker? My buddy says, as his cousin leaned forward in his seat cushion. Skinwalker. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. A skinwalker in the town I grew up in. To give you all a little background on a skinwalker, they are a shape-shifting being that can become anything, and sound like anything at its own will. But according to some tales, these skinwalkers are people that have committed a true and horrifying thing. They've killed their family, and only then can they have the power to become a skinwalker. As the Navajo Indians called it, Inal Delushi, and I feared as my parents did, and their parents, and so on. I've never hoped to hear or run into one of these things, and I never planned to until that night. I looked at his cousin and said in a shaky voice, I don't want to deal with something like this. I mean, this thing is evil, and has been known to kill people without any sort of hesitation. His cousin nodded his head and stood up. I know the risks, and I'll take them, but the question is, are you two cowards up for it? He asked as he finished off his glass. My buddy nodded, and I didn't want to do it, but I said yes too, only because I thought it was a story, and that this thing couldn't have possibly been real. So we hopped in my buddy's truck and headed out to the road that the old cabin was on. It was an old dirt road that was heavily, and I do mean heavily wooded on both sides. I got an uneasy feeling as I rode in the backseat of the truck in the middle as to not be too close to the windows, since I am a bit of a coward. We got close to the house as it came into view of the headlights of the truck. They stopped as soon as it came into view, and they grabbed flashlights and opened their doors. "What are you guys doing?" I asked as I clung to a knife I kept in my left pocket. "We're going to explore the cabin. Aren't you coming?" His cousin answered as I looked at them both and shook my head. "Y'all got me out this far. I'm not going anywhere past this spot on the seat," I said as his cousin rolled his eyes and they shut the truck doors. I leaned forward and locked the door and took the keys out of the ignition and held them in my hand. I sat in that truck, my left hand on my knife and the right on the flashlight on my keychain that was off since I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Sitting in that truck, watching them walk through the cabin, their flashlights shining through the broken windows, the collapsed roof, as they walked around inside the hellish cabin. In the middle of the woods, I felt safe at least. After what was about 15 minutes, they came back to the truck and I unlocked the doors and let them in. What scared the skinwalker is gonna get you. He and his cousin laughed as he shut the door. I'm sure he hasn't moved an inch, neither has his courage, my buddy said, laughing as he shut the door. He put the key in the ignition and turned it, and the truck didn't kick over. He tried it again. Nothing. And again, nothing. Over and over again he tried to get the engine to start, but nothing. But what they hadn't realized, that I don't think any of us realized until we watched the dash cam footage back, was that when he turned it the first time, there was a small white dot at the door to the cabin, and the next time he turned it, the being began to materialize. The closer it got, the clearer what it was came to shape. It was a woman, wearing a white nightgown, and what I think was blood all over the front of her nightgown, in a mess, almost like she had spilled something on herself. My cousins looked up and screamed as the truck's engine roared to life. My buddy's cousin grabbed a gun out of the glove box and leaned out the window and fired at whatever this thing was, and the bullet seemed to either pass right through it, or just wasn't fazed by them. The woman laughed, and it was almost like the sound of a little girl laughing. The woman snapped her fingers and disappeared. My buddy slammed on the gas and pulled in, and began to turn around when we saw her again, but this time she was different. She had become a large wolf with what looked like fire around her neck like a collar. This thing had terrified all three of us, as my cousin unloaded his pistol and loaded it back up and began to fire rounds towards the now wolf creature, as the creature howled an ungodly howl. This howl sounded like a woman screaming, mixed with a howl. The shrill, high-pitched sounds made us all cover our ears due to the pain we were feeling. As soon as the howl was over, we all looked up to see this thing was gone once again, and all we saw was the dirt road in front of us. We all looked around to see if we could find this thing, and then I saw it. In the woods to our left, right inside the wood line, were two glowing red eyes staring at us, as the fire around its neck ignited again, as it lit fire to the trees around it. My buddy slammed the gas pedal as we tore down the dirt road, as I turned and watched out the back window, as the fire had now begun to follow us down the road, and I watched the she-wolf chase us down the road. The trees burned around us as the crackling of branches and the sounds of trees slamming down behind us. As we tore down the driveway, my body was shaking, and my buddy was screaming as he drove. We saw the road as he turned the truck sharply to the left, nearly flipping the truck over as we slid into a ditch across the road from the driveway. We watched as the creature stopped at the end of the driveway and wouldn't move further. It just turned around and walked back towards the abandoned home, and as it walked back towards the house, the fire went with it. It felt like an illusion, that the woods around us were burning as we fled from the cabin. We got out and started to push the truck out of the ditch and back onto the road. We sat there for a few moments terrified and still in shock at what had just happened back at the cabin and how fast things took a turn for the worse. Was that a skinwalker? My buddy asked his cousin, as his cousin stared at the pistol in his hand before setting it back in the glove box. Yeah, that was a skinwalker, and I really wish we hadn't gone back there because it could have killed us. We eventually, after snapping out of our fearful trance, we decided to go back to his house and have a much needed drink. We all got back to his house about half an hour later and walked into the house. His parents were most likely asleep as we opened up the basement door to his dad's liquor cellar. His cousin went over and cracked open a 35-year-old bottle of Fireball Cinnamon whiskey and poured each of us a glass. We all joined in a toast to be alive, and we all headed off to bed, as I didn't feel like walking out of his house until it was daylight, due to what was happening that night. I still wonder what would have happened if we couldn't have gotten his truck started, or what would have happened if my buddy and his cousin had come face to face with this thing in the cabin, with no chance of escape from the skinwalker. I was told by my elders to fear these creatures, and after that night, I fear them more than the demon I faced a few weeks ago. Because I know with demons, I can banish them, or at least protect myself. These skinwalkers, you can't. You just have to hope and pray you can get away. My friends and I were lucky, but if we ever went back, I doubt we will be that lucky again. When I was about 17, I used to work in a grocery store. For the most part, I was a cashier. Usually I would work day shifts until this woman started coming in on a regular basis. I later learned her name to be Ruby. Ruby always wore baggy sweatpants along with a t-shirt or tank top covered with stains. Her skin was very pale, and her hair was very unkempt. Ruby always came in going straight for the medicine aisle. After she was done filling her basket with various medicines, she would always make a beeline towards the alcohol. If you were to grab any given medicine bottle, it almost always says something to the effect of, "Do not drink alcohol after taking a dose." To make matters worse, every once in a while, she would buy some bleach along with the alcohol and medicine. The first time she came to my register, she was very twitchy. Her erratic movements made the people around her go to a different line to check out. Regardless how people appear or what they purchase, I always greet them with a friendly, "Hello, how are you doing this fine evening?" I asked her in a cheery tone. She stared at me for what seemed like 10 minutes, but was realistically about 30 or 40 seconds. A long time for an answer to a simple question. "I've been better," she said in a rather raspy voice. "Fuck," I said in my mind. I really don't care how people truly are. I just say it to give myself a good image. "Why? What's the problem?" I asked. "I had a miscarriage a few weeks ago, and my abusive ex-husband said it was because of the way I took care of myself, and he left me a few days later." I wasn't expecting her to say that to me. Frankly, I still didn't really care, but I try to be as professional as possible when I'm in public, so I pretended I did. "I'm very sorry to hear that. Will you be okay?" I shouldn't have asked that. Ruby was originally looking at the screen that tells you the amount that you have to pay for the items you buy, but after I asked if she was going to be okay, she looked at me, and her eyes spooked me. Her left eye was brown, and her right eye was red. I've never seen someone with different colored eyes, let alone someone with a red pupil. "I'm not sure. Maybe I will be once I don't feel anything at all." After she said that, she rubbed her eye that was red, and after she finished rubbing it, the eye turned blue. With so many abnormal things going on at once, I wasn't sure what to say or do. This woman was buying medicine with alcohol. She basically said that she wants to die, and now she has eyes that change colors. I just said the most logical thing that came to my mind. "Come on, you don't mean that. I'll always be here for you if you want to talk." She didn't say anything immediately after I told her that. After she grabbed her bags, she headed towards the door. She said in a low tone, "Thank you." After she thanked me, she left before I could even open my mouth. After the encounter with her, my coworker, Linda, came over to me. "What's the deal with her?" Linda asked curiously. "She isn't liking life much at the moment," I said. "Why was she twitching so much?" said Linda. "Might be from all the medicine and alcohol. God knows what else she partakes in," I said. "I hope she gets help," Linda said. I nodded my head agreeing with Linda. We finished doing our responsibilities for the grocery store. The rest of the night was uneventful. Ruby would come in about once a week for about 6 months. She always gone to my register to buy her drug concoction, even when there were shorter lines. Ruby would always stand her ground and wait specifically for me. "Excuse me, ma'am. You can come to me if you are ready to check out," Linda said in a cheery voice. "Oh, no thanks. I'm not in a rush or anything," Ruby said. Something that is always unsettling in her eyes. Her eyes were always different colors every time I spoke to her. Like her left eye would be green, and her right eye would be pink. But the next week, her left eye would be yellow, and her right eye would be orange. Her eyes were never the same color whenever I saw her. After the first encounter, I haven't really spoken to her much. I just asked her how she was, and she would respond with good. Eventually, she randomly wanted to get to know me. As I was checking out her items, she said, "What's your name, son?" "I'm Jordan. What's yours?" I said in my normal friendly tone, "You can call me Ruby." I wanted to let you know that I really appreciate your kindness that you've been giving me lately. I was taken aback by this. For the past few weeks, I haven't really said anything more than hello, and how are you doing? I responded with, it is my pleasure to serve you, I said with a smile. I didn't really know what else to say. It was beyond me how she was still alive at this point. I was under the assumption that Ruby would take the medicine along with the alcohol as a suicide attempt, but she kept coming back for more. If you try to end your life, and the method you try using doesn't work, wouldn't you try to do something else? One day, I had the closing shift. It was only Linda and I in the store. Linda was stocking shelves, while I was texting people on my phone. Around 10 p.m., Ruby came into the store and just bought an iced coffee. I didn't question it, but I was glad to see that she wasn't buying the medicine and alcohol. Ruby was more twitchy than usual. How are you doing this fine evening? I asked. She didn't respond. She actually looked angry. I decided to ask again, but in a different way. How was your day today, Ruby? Why do you talk so much? I was stunned. Ruby was always unsettling to say the least, but she was never hostile like this before. I was just wondering how you were doing today, I said, flustered. Don't worry about my fucking day. Just sell me my coffee and I'll be on my way. I sold her the coffee and didn't say anything else to her. I mean, what else was there to say? At 10:30, I clocked out. As I was leaving, I saw Ruby a few meters away from me, her eyes glowing red. I flashed my phone light at her and noticed that she was holding a machete. Jordan, Ruby said with no emotion. Saying I was scared would be an understatement after seeing Ruby like this. Ruby, why are you still here? What is that you're holding? Don't worry, Jordan. I'm not going to hurt you. I want to hurt Josh. I had no idea who Josh was, but I'm assuming that was her ex-boyfriend. That bastard never supported me. He never showed me any attention. He just used me. Where is Josh? I asked. I don't know. I was hoping that you would know. Again, I've never even heard of Josh up until now. I knew I had to get away from her. Ruby, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I have no idea where Josh is. What? Why don't you know? Ruby said with confusion. Ruby, I've had a long day at work. Could you please just let me go home? I said, practically begging her. I want you to help me find him, Ruby demanded. I don't want to help you, Ruby. I said, more pissed off than scared at this point. You're the only person that can help me, Ruby yelled. No, I have no way of helping you, I said. I began to hear police sirens nearby. Please head towards me, I said in my mind. Help me, or I will not hesitate to slice you into 100 different pieces, Ruby demanded. Ruby, leave me alone. Leave now, and never come back. I was really hoping Linda wasn't going to come out. She had to clean and organize a few things before she left. Ruby started slowly making her way towards me, not saying anything. I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let this abomination think that it's scaring me. Ruby was about 30 feet away from me when the police showed up. Cops pointed their guns at Ruby, but she didn't stop making her way towards me. It was like she didn't even acknowledge that they were even there. The cops shouted for Ruby to stop. I started to back up a little bit, because she was still getting close, and it was windy. And the last thing I wanted was to be shot, just because the wind pointed the bullet in my direction. One of the cops tackled Ruby, and the others made sure the machete was away. Linda came out of the store. Did you call the cops? I asked. Yeah, I was about to clock out and I saw her holding that large blade. Thanks, Linda. If it wasn't for you, I don't think I'd be alive. The cops arrested Ruby and I haven't seen her since. Ever since then, I would give Linda different kinds of gifts to show her how grateful I was for her saving me. Linda asked me something that I completely forgot about. Jordan, you might think I'm crazy, but I think her eyes were glowing red. My eyes widened. I thought I was imagining that, I said nervously. We prayed that we wouldn't see Ruby again, and thankfully, we never did. Darkness coats nearly the entire room, a comforting blanket of emptiness, in which only a small nightlight in the shape of a tacky, golden elephant pierces through the inky blackness. I stretch my long limbs laboriously, clawed fingers scraping against the high ceiling as I study my surroundings. The room is dominated by a large king-size bed, two forms lying in the center. The first one is a well-built male, softly snoring and clearly deep in the throes of sleep. He doesn't interest me. The second, though, a slender female lies rigidly, eyes open wide and darting around the room, looking, I know, for me. She can sense me somewhere in the blackness and knows what is about to happen to her, just as she knows, after so many years, that she can do nothing to prevent it. Closing my eyes, I feel the tremendous surge of power seeping from my fingers as an invisible flow of the paralyzing agent used for centuries by my race drifts like thick smoke towards the occupants lying in the bed. The male, of course, is immune and completely unaware of my presence, but the female, my true target, senses the danger and makes a desperate attempt to get up and flee, but it's already too late. Surely she knows this. This is a dance that she and I have performed countless times in her short, mortal life. She is not immune, and no matter what she does to try to prevent her fate, it will always find her. I will always find her. Her eyes widen to what must surely be a painful degree, and the first, sweet blast of her terror hits me square in the chest. Watching her expressive face, I can almost feel the tingle of static energy as it seeps into her toes, up her spine, and finally come to a rest in the deepest region of her brain. She is mine now, utterly at my mercy, and she knows this. I continue watching as a dull resignation settles over her. Jessica, I purr. I've missed you. It's been so long. As soon as the words leave my jagged lips, Jessica's eyes finally focus in on my vicinity. A small breathy sound escaping from her clenched jaw. I know that she can't quite see me yet, standing hunched in the corner of her bedroom. I take a small step closer to the dim glow of the ugly nightlight. I've missed you terribly, but for some strange reason, I get the impression that the feeling's just not mutual. You managed to shut me out so much longer this time. The pills, the therapy, all those breathing and relaxation exercises, all to treat your condition. Sleep paralysis, I believe it is now referred to in your highly enlightened age. I take another small step, savoring the moment. Yes, I know all about your treatments, the medications and sleep studies, all those misguided attempts to keep us apart. I confess, I am a bit wounded. We've been together nearly your entire life, and it's time you finally accepted that we'll always be together, or at least until I have wrung the very last breath from your ungrateful body. Can't you understand? I need you too much. You keep me nourished. Your horror and fear sustain me as nothing else can. Why would you begrudge your oldest, dearest friend what they need to survive? It's cruel. It's selfish. I hiss, hearing the menace bleed into my tone. I pause in mid-step as a loud, sudden snort emanates from the male lying next to her. And this must be David, your fiancé now, I understand. He's a big, strapping young man, and a sleep therapist as well, right? Your sleep therapist. Sounds like he may be taking his responsibilities a bit too far, though. Surely he knows that he's not actually supposed to sleep with his patients. Tisk tisk. But I suppose I can understand the attraction to you. Surely such a large, capable man like him can keep you safe from the darkness. From me. Why don't you ask him for help? Go ahead. I'll wait right here. Her eyes, with those deep blue irises and grossly contracted pupils, slide slowly over to the man sleeping beside her. She stares pleadingly at him, as best as she can without turning her head. A tiny, pathetic croak is all she can push through her stiff throat. After a moment of tense silence, her wide eyes shift back to mine once more. No? I ask as I take another slow step, drawing ever closer to the bed. See, I knew you still cared. I'm always watching you, Jessica. I'm in your head, your very psyche, and I've consumed enough of your being to know your every weakness. Every dark thought you've ever whispered to the night when you thought you were alone. I was there, always listening. Remember all the good times we've shared together? The countless nights you've given so graciously of your pain, your life force? My mind flashes back to the first time I saw her, when she was just a young, naive child of 6, maybe 7. Too young to understand the complexity of what I am, but old enough to see the wrongness, the terror of it all. Her innocence and purity were the sweetest aphrodisiac I had ever experienced in my prolonged existence. I'd come to her for the very first time then, aware that, at the mercy of the paralytic agent, she would be powerful against me, but unprepared for the ferocity of the pleasure and strength that her fear would give me. I fed, and fed well that first night, drawing out her anguish for the entirety of the night, relenting only when the first, stray glimmers of dawn approached. I fed off of so many souls in my time, but no other human satiated my hunger like she did. I have no concept of why, only knew that her essence strengthened me in a way that nothing else ever did. I admit that I became a bit obsessed with her, ignoring any other opportunities to feed, few as they were, saving my ferocious appetite only for her. I knew that I was taking too much, but couldn't seem to stop myself. I watched her grow weaker, more lifeless each time I drank from her. Most likely, she would have died if she hadn't sought out help, but finally she did, and though the treatments had blocked me out for several months, it was inevitable that I would eventually creep back in. Nothing could keep the darkness at bay forever. Perhaps it was the obsession that caused me to feel the need to unburden myself to her, to tell her things that I had never uttered to any other human. It's not your fault, really, but that of the first humans, your early ancestors, interlopers. We were the earliest of God's creations, his beloved children. We too lived, loved, and reveled in this world, free to do as we pleased, live as we pleased. Whole beings who danced in the light and indulged freely in the souls of other, weaker forms the great Creator had provided for our consumption. Those creatures were not unlike the cattle and livestock that your race survives on. Yes, I once held a solid, physical form much like your own, but soon we began to crave more, need more. We soon began feasting off of each other's fear and torment, the ultimate taboo, in order to further strengthen our own bodies. Eventually, the Creator grew, disappointed with us, and our primitive and violent urges to satisfy only ourselves. Regardless of the pain we inflicted on each other, he cast us out of the light and out of this world, only to see us writhed in the black, unwhole, and unworthy. And then, he created you to replace us. The race of mankind became his final, desperate attempt at perfection, but he failed. I take several, swifter steps towards the girl, my rage getting the better of me. It is in the darkness that we have survived, barely able to exist off those few humans. He nearly spat the word, so hated as it was by those of his kind. The small portion of them who were susceptible to our powers, those who lacked the natural blockers that would render them immune to our abilities. In the beginning, less than 2% of the entire population of your race had this anomaly. That left mere thousands to feed many millions. Do you understand? There were far too few of you to go around, and millions of us starved. Went so mad with hunger that they willingly ended their miserable existence. First my mother, then my mates, and eventually even my daughter. All lost throughout the countless centuries. Your God did this to us on purpose. His holiness just couldn't condone wiping out an entire species that he once created so lovingly. In his great benevolence, he would never bathe his white hands in blood. In creating such a tiny percentage of you with the necessary genetic predisposition, or as your lifeless fiance there would call it, the sleep paralysis. He gave us a chance to survive, certainly, but only at the cost of nearly the whole race. The whole time he must have known that all he really did was prolong our eventual demise and cause us all eternal suffering. It was his final gift to us, and it became our greatest curse. I was almost to bed now, so close that I could smell the sickly sweet scent of her terror. I inhaled deeply and smiled. In her growing sense of panic, her eyes and nostrils flared as quick, tiny puffs of air pushed past her lips. I paused, taking a moment to calm myself. It was suddenly imperative that I finish my story before I lost all control. Do you know? I was very close to giving up, ready to face my end when I first laid eyes on you. You were so young, so full of hope and promise. You reminded me much of my own lost child, and for a time, I even felt guilty for taking so deeply of your life force. But the strength, the euphoria it gave me quickly overcame any misplaced empathy. Were it not for you, creatures, my family would still be alive, and be first in God's love. Nearly giddy now with anticipation, I quickly close the small gap between us and watch her eyes fill with terror, and I smile, feeling the bones shift and my jaw unhinge with the unnatural wideness of it, as I knew it would. The hideousness of my grin brought out a fresh wave of delicious horror that I quickly devoured. All of your science and enlightenment is so wasted and ignorant. You refuse to see the wisdom that those before you understood for centuries. You are not diseased, and therefore cannot be cured. Rather, you are cursed, chosen by God to provide for my kind. I had to hunch down several feet, nearly kneeling in an effort to reach her as I whispered, "Your ancestors knew what we were, though they soon forgot our true origins. They believed, mistakenly, that the first of our kind, Lilith and Adam's first wife, vanished to make room for Eve. Although symbolically this was true, we in point of fact preceded Adam. We were the first beloved creations of God, a chosen people who enjoyed the ease and luxury of his favor. But our crimes against each other eventually became too great, too numerous for him to ignore, and so we cast out our entire race to make room for you. You cannot know the bleak despair, the desperation that comes from being so utterly forsaken, from having everything you are and all that you love torn so irrevocably from your grasp. But you soon will." Ever so methodically, I stalk my long, razor-sharp nails across her chest as I speak those last few words in a sing-song voice, puncturing tiny holes into her very soul and causing small streams of it to dance slowly up to my starving lips. I inhale her essence, dragging it deeply into my rotting lungs. Suddenly, with a preternatural speed far too fast for her inferior senses to track, I straddled her slender body, growing more ravenous at the first small taste of her aura. I rake my long nails more deeply down the length of her chest, feeling the rending of her soul as I do. As always, I knew that I would leave no physical marks. There would be no evidence of my assault if and when she finally woke, because I wasn't cleaving her flesh, but rather the deepest marrow of her life. I nearly cackled as the scent of her pain reached me. The Night Mara, they used to call us. Wretched creatures who fed off souls, breath, and blood. We were the basis of every night creature of your lore. Vampires, succubi, and demons. But sadly, throughout the centuries, the true nature of our kind has been lost. We, who are the authors of everything your kind fears, every bump in the night and growl in the darkness, were relegated to nothing more than dreams, and the Night Mara would eventually become your nightmares. Lost in the ecstasy of the feeding, I savagely dig my claws into her body as deeply as they can go, and then roughly twist my fingers. Jessica reacts in the only way she is able, whimpering softly through clenched teeth. If only you hadn't tried so hard in your attempts to keep me from you, denied me to the brink of starvation, then perhaps I could have satisfied myself with a small taste, just a sampling of your agony. But now I cannot control my hunger. Tonight I have no choice but to gorge myself on the banquet laid out so temptingly before me. Another tiny, gargled sound escapes her as numerous tentacle-like straws slither their way out of my gray, concave chest and burrow deep into the holes that my claws had made. The tentacles instantly start contracting as they begin to greedily milk the life from her. I choke back an ecstatic moan as I feed directly from her consciousness. Looking her straight in the eye, I watch as a single, solitary tear emerges from her tightly closed eyelids. Ever so slowly I lean down to lick at it with my long, forked tongue. Don't cry, my sweet. Not now. For you have yet to hear the best part of my tale. For so long, we have fought among ourselves over the pitiful few of you, whose spirits we were able to consume. We've been reduced to nothing more than wolves, savage and starving dogs fighting to the death for nothing more than the miserable table scraps. But after countless millennia of watching you pathetic and weak creatures, I have come to a rather unsettling but also welcome conclusion. Humans really aren't so different from the Night Mara. Much as it pains me to say it, both of our species are parasites, monstrous, and selfish beasts who feed off of the weak and sickly. With every generation that passes, your kind become more like us and less like him. And almost overnight, it seemed there were suddenly great numbers of humans being born with a lack of immunity. Far too steep a climb to be mere coincidence. For the first time since the dawn of your history, my kind feeds and feeds well. We have begun to prosper once again. We know the cause, even if your race is too arrogant and naive to see it. Mankind has grown nearly identical to my kind, and crush the weak, delight in your ability to destroy all the goodness, and in your own way, you even feed off each other in your attempts to gain power. We have taken notice, and so has he. Your God gave you everything, all the freedoms and comfort that he once offered only to us, and you have squandered it, just as we did. But as I said before, God can't condone the wanton destruction of those he has created, and so he has chosen to wake you up, one soul at a time, until eventually we will reach you all, consume every last one of you, and all of this with his blessing. It would appear that even in our hideousness, he prefers us to you. You'll soon know our pain, our despair, and you will know it quite intimately. It is unlikely that she will survive this night. My thirst is so great and my will too weak. I just can't help but feel that I would be doing her a favor, a small mercy to end it for her, here and now. For if not, she would soon come to suffer the complete desolation of the Forsaken, along with the rest of mankind. It seems somehow less cruel to just put her out of her misery, but either way, it really doesn't matter. There are now so much more of the curse to go around, and I will easily find another susceptible to the parasite. But as for tonight, she is my prey, and I have only just begun the feast. My smile slowly widens. My name is David, and I was engaged to a sweet, beautiful woman named Jessica. She died last night. The doctors all say that it was a heart attack. A painless and easy passing in her sleep, and maybe, hopefully that's all it was. I woke early this morning from the darkest, most graphic nightmare of my life to find her lying cold and stiff next to me. Her frozen fingers were stretched, resting less than a centimeter from my own hand, almost as if in the last few seconds of her life, she had reached out to me. Jessica had suffered sleep paralysis nearly her entire life. That is how we met, in fact. You see, I'm a sleep therapist, and she had the most debilitating case of the disease that I had ever seen. Over the many hours we spent together, I couldn't help but fall in love with her, and she was getting better. It had been several months, in fact, since she'd had an episode. But last night, the nightmare I had, well, I was the demon in the story. I saw and felt everything from his point of view, and just as he predicted, Jessica did die. And the preceding story has been an exact account of the dream that I had that night. Now, I have always been a man of science. I don't believe in the paranormal or demons, and I certainly don't believe that our nightmares can hurt us. Or at least I didn't, but this creature, or whatever he is, was right about one more thing, and it haunts me most of all. In the past 5 years, the reported incidence and severity of sleep paralysis have nearly tripled, and medical science has no real explanation as to why. What if everything that happened last night wasn't just a dream, but a warning? This is a true story. It takes place in Ohio in a duplex. That means there is a front half and back half of a big house. I think I was 18 when I moved in with my mom and stepdad, still in school. When I went to live with them, I was at home by myself all night. My mom and stepdad worked the night shift. When I first saw the house, I felt a weird feeling about the place. I could not place what it was, but I had a weird feeling. So the first few months I was there, I heard weird noises like footsteps, voices, doors opening, etc. I was kind of freaked out. One night not long after, I went to bed. I forgot to note my bedroom was the door with the only access to the attic, and it is a walk-in attic. I was laying in bed. I heard what sounded like heavy steel-toed boots walking around in the attic. I knew it was paranormal, and I was scared shitless. I also forgot to mention it's a 2-story place. So as that was happening, I also heard something walking up the stairs at the same time. I thought my parents got home early. As I was waiting for the hall light to show around the outline of the door, no light ever came on. I need to note my parents didn't believe me. They didn't believe me until stuff happened to them. So my mom and stepdad were in the bedroom at night going to sleep. The doors in the bedroom closet shook violently. The closet is a walk-in closet, where the doors connect to the same closet. They had told me that my mom's side shook, then my stepdad's shook, and then it sounded like someone kicked it. My stepdad grabbed his golf club and opened the door. Nothing was there. This is just a few occurrences. There were many more, but I just wanted to point these ones out.